All right, 1, 2, 3. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Chalkboard History. More 160th Crash Course Curriculum.
V-A-O-T.
The Army of Tennessee. The fabled Confederate Army of Tennessee. Commanded by so many people that we can barely keep track.
It's a lot like the Army of the Potomac. I mean, that revolving door.
Yeah, actually, but way cooler.
Yeah,
I must say the Army of Tennessee is far cooler than the Army of the Potomac. Lots more, just more interesting characters. So we're going to talk about the AOT as it was really fall of '64. Mm-hmm. So we're going to say Atlanta, post-Atlanta up to the Battle of Franklin. Mm-hmm. So lots of different commanders. We're not going to get into who coulda, shoulda, woulda, who should have commanded and who shouldn't. John Bell Hood's in command, and he is, let's see, Johnston, Beauregard, Bragg, Johnston. He's number 5, right? Yeah. So he's the 5th commander in about 3 weeks. He's literally, though, the 5th commander since the summer of '62.
Yeah. Yeah, when Beauregard gets sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, even the lower officer ranks and the rank and file, it's no wonder the AOT struggles as it does, because I think there's just often such a great lack of cohesion. Plus, they consistently run into Grant and Sherman and Thomas. But
they have their own political problems within the Army. And,
yes, Pat Claiborne suggests arming slaves. Yeah. That goes over really well in Richmond, Virginia, and I can't get my seat in the right spot right now. Bella keeps telling me to move over and get closer to you. So let's talk about the Army of Tennessee and who were the guys in the ranks. What's the pulse of this army? Let's say October of '64 as they're headed across Alabama toward Tennessee.
Well, if you read their letters, they're enthusiastic about the offensive.
Can we just say they're just badasses?
Yeah, we can. I mean, they are just badasses.
They really are.
I mean, they've been at it for the better part of 3 years, and granted, not a very large number of victories in the win column. They get beaten more often than they win in battle, but there is something about them. And that ability that they just keep getting up and they just keep fighting and they just keep fighting. And it's like, my God, haven't we done this enough? And they just keep going back to the river.
It reminds me of that old Civil War Journal episode, The Hard Luck Army of Tennessee.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, they were.
They are. It's got a little bit of floweriness to it, but it's true.
They had come close so many times.
Yeah.
And
Shiloh, day 1. And then day 2.
Perryville, Murfreesboro.
Chickamauga. They win at Chickamauga. And then they lose at Chattanooga.
Even the
which almost cancels out Chickamauga.
The Battle of Atlanta has one that's always very much interested me, because they had a chance that day to deal Sherman an unbelievably lethal blow. But like at all these other places, it's like fate intervenes.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, post-war, I think a lot of the former AOT guys felt that Providence was the only thing that often stepped in their way, which is an interesting perspective, that Providence thus didn't want the Confederates to win.
And the Army of Tennessee almost always seems to be one division short. If you look at all the battles, how they was, if they just had an extra division here, Stones River, if they'd have had an extra division here, they could have done it. If they had an extra division at Franklin, they could have done it.
So who are these men that in late November, after having gone through everything that they already had, struck north into Tennessee? Who were
they're the bitter
these
enders. Men? These are the diehards. The ones that their trip home might easily be in a pine box as opposed to going back to the house.
But who are they? Well, who were they, and what had they become?
Who were they in terms of where they're from? A lot of...
No. I mean, who were they?
They're Confederate soldiers.
Aren't they representatives, though, of that particular generation? This is where I'm really going.
Yeah, these are pretty much young men who are raised in the 1840s and 1850s, right through the sectional crisis over slavery.
Born 1830 to 1845.
Yeah, they come of age during really the breakdown of the country.
And while the majority were not slave owners, probably 20% of them were. Mm-hmm. And there are camp slaves all over.
Sam Watkins is the perfect example.
Right.
There
Sam Watkins, everybody's favorite Confederate, whose father was one of the biggest slave owners in Murray County.
And he brought his own slave off to war with him and sank her.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what I'm really getting at is these are men who are defined by their times.
Yes.
And these were the believers in 61 or 62. Mm-hmm. And I don't think their commitment has wavered.
No.
Pat Claiborne, immigrant, non-slave holder, but lived in Helena. Mm-hmm. And said not long before Spring Hill and Franklin that if this cause in which I believe is doomed to fail, I hope I shall fall with it.
Yes.
Countless soldiers believe that death was an acceptable option. Mm-hmm. And I think what has intrigued me is how does this generation get to that point where they literally said, fight to the death, and that's exactly what they had done and would do again at Franklin. So who were they? You know, who were these men? Meaning, what is their place in our history today? Is it just about heroism and bravery and defending their home, or that they were members of the Army of Tennessee? Or is there something to be learned from who these men were and the times in which they were raised?
I think they're on this. I don't know that inevitability is the right thing, but they're born into this, and it's almost willed that they'll be the ones that fight the war of their father or their grandfather. And they come from that very particular era in the South, that peculiar institution. The slave-based agrarian world is what they've always known, and it's dying through the war, and it's dying with them.
Is it also perhaps revealing to think about that the world that they saw it, if you were from Lowndes County, Alabama, or you were from New Orleans, or you were from the low country of South Carolina.
Or Franklin, Tennessee, for that matter.
Your state was your country, and your local community was your world. And that many of these men did not understand that the guys on the other side didn't see the world the same way.
Right.
Isn't that a terrible tragedy in some ways? Because yes, they're born into it, but they also had a perspective that was not held by the majority of the country.
Yeah.
And I don't think most of them ever knew it.
It's almost unique to them in that sense.
And so here they are in October of 1864, and they know where the war stands. And they know that whatever their world is to them, that world is dying. That world is being suffocated and choked to death.
So then it's okay to become then a noble martyr dying upon the altar of the holy
cause. As one said, better that than be subjugated by Yankees and Negroes.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is sometimes the lesson. Because we cloak this all in you've heard me say this moral equivalency. You know, you can't judge either side.
Right.
Even though I think the side that wore blue gets judged all the time.
Right.
By some of the same people who are incessant about cannot judge anybody. Right, cannot judge anybody. But I think there is something to learn. And it's also, they were the only generation like them. And they were also the last generation like that world ever produced. There was never another American like one born in rural Georgia in 1840.
Right.
There was nobody else before him and nobody else like him afterwards. And maybe that's this crucible of the war, is that the country really had become so divided geographically, but within the mind and the heart, that their version of what the United States was, what America was, what liberty was. Pete Carmichael. How could they discuss liberty and not think about black people? And his great answer, because they never really thought about it, because they'd never been required to think about it, even if they were poor. That's not a judgment. That's a reality. And then you get them to Franklin, and they know for a week and a half they've been moving north. And they're looking across that long, open, rolling plain.
And let's not forget what happened 24 hours earlier.
I don't know how anybody can't actually have at least, sympathy isn't the word, but an understanding of the emotions of that moment. And then there's everybody on the other side. And you see there is those two armies aren't the same. We look the same. We talk the same.
Sometimes.
But we are not the same. Even think about the fact that it's weird because you can't really dial the clock back. We came from, you're as far from, as close to Mexico as I was to Canada. And thus, our worlds are materially different. And how many people ended up on Civil War battlefields just because they were cursed by when they were born or where they were born?
I think that is the kind of the tragic story for the Army of Tennessee.
For the Army of Tennessee. And maybe the biggest tragedy is they lost. And losing a war, especially like that, creates a different kind of definition. We still struggle with that. But the Army of Tennessee's legacy and what it was cannot be forgotten, because they're an integral part of, they're essentially a quarter of the military story of the entire American Civil War. Or at least like 23% if you want to give the Trans-Mississippi a little something. I mean, there's really
nice to pay some respect.
Two big armies in the East, two big armies in the West in very general terms, and the AOT is one of those four big pieces. And so they are extraordinarily important. Last words, Mr. Army of Tennessee, New Orleans, Southern, John Bell Hood supporter?
No, I think you've pretty much done it there.
Anything else?
No, I think to walk through the cemetery.
Wait a second.
What?
Memorial Hall.
Yeah.
How many AOT relics?
Tons.
Right.
Tons.
See,
and then the cemetery too, Metairie Cemetery. It's got the tumulus for the Army of Tennessee.
See, everybody,
Johnston up top.
Everybody needs to go to they need to come here.
Yeah.
But they need to go there.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you have to see the emblem. You have to see the flag. You have to see the uniform. And you have to think about that inside that uniform and the person who carried that flag, they were real. And the world they lived in had many similarities, but it also had stark differences. And I think that's why a place like that is, it's as important as I think any place, especially now.
I think too, a walk through the cemetery at Carnton, or a walk through any of those kind of Western theater battlefield cemeteries, where you get a chance to see this is ultimately what they got.
Their
at the
fate.
end of the day. This is what was left for them, was a nice plot of ground on a quiet battlefield.
Well said. Thanks, everybody.